Welcome to How We Scaled It for Design Teams, a show that explores the journey through the arduous road of growing a successful design practice. I'm your host, Adam Perlis, founder and CEO of Academy, the UX staffing and recruiting agency. And today we have the pleasure of speaking with Chris Reardon, the former head of product design for responsible AI at Meta. In today's interview, Christopher will discuss how AI is changing the role of UX designers, skills that will be most important for UX designers to have in the future, and how UX designers can ensure that they're using AI in an ethical way. Welcome, Chris.
Hi, Adam. It's great to be here. I've really enjoyed our conversations, and I'm glad to be on the show and talking to you today.
Same here, Chris. Thanks so much for being here. So just to kind of frame things up for people, I wanted to, tell people a little bit about, some of the conversations that we've been having. I think what's really interesting is a lot of teams and individuals are starting to think about both how to utilize AI in their day-to-day work, but also in some cases having to build tools for AI. And one of the biggest challenges in doing so is doing it in a responsible and ethical manner. And you are actually an expert in this subject. And that's why I really wanted to talk to you today. And if you could just give the audience a little bit of context about your background and also share with us a bit about some of the things you're working on today.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I grew up in England. I am the son of an American Air Forceman who lived in England at the time, and we got moved all over the country, all over the world, and I got exposed to a lot of different cultures at a very early age. And I think, understanding how people live in different parts of the world has really kind of helped me have empathy for people and users. I studied graphic design in England at Kingston University, did print and packaging design for many years, and then around 2000, I got into web design and building applications. I moved to New York City area in 2006. I was in Los Angeles prior to that and worked in different agencies at different companies. One of the sort of bigger things that I worked on at the time was redesigning AOL. I helped redesign it from a subscription business to an ad revenue business. And supported 250 million users. So that was a really interesting design system project. Later, I got into working on brands like Apple and IBM and Target at TBWA and at Ogilvy. At Ogilvy, I was an executive creative director and helped launch IBM Watson in 2013. And that's when I really got the bug for AI. So I've been working on AI since then, so roughly 10 years. And it's just been a fascinating journey. Branding it, building the external image of things like Watson, but then also getting on the inside. So in 2016, I really wanted to understand the technology, and I moved to a company called Amelia, working on natural language and natural language models, much like ChatGPT today. I built a virtual natural language agent at the time, and learned a lot really about how voice interfaces and text interfaces were going to change the future. I realized that they could be very problematic at that time, and that's when I moved to Meta to work on responsible AI. So that kind of brings us up to date. Currently, I'm consulting. I'm doing a lot of speaking and podcasts and interviews and things like that. I've started to do some writing and just thinking about, it's been great to see AI explode in the public eye, and now lots of interest around how do you build these systems and the tools to build these systems as well. So it's been a fascinating ride.
That's amazing. Wow, what a fantastic background, and just so cool to hear about your journey from all these different companies all the way leading up to Meta, where, really it sounds like you started to do some of the most important work of your career. Tell me, you have this very interesting title there. It was the head of product design for responsible AI. And, it sounds like it was a really important mission, but, what should this audience know about what responsible AI means?
It's a great question, and it's kind of multi-layered. So I'll first answer what is responsible AI in terms of product design and my role, and then I'll go into some of the facets of that for larger companies and companies that want to, start to incorporate AI into their products and services. So Meta, responsible AI, or RAI as we used to call it, is basically built up of different dimensions. There's AI transparency, there's AI fairness, privacy, robustness, and governance and accountability. And so each of those are different facets of being responsible, and they play different roles at different times. So AI is not a one-size-fits-all tool. It can be very customized, can be used in different ways. And so it's not very easy to design a design system or a set of guidelines or what have you that is just a rubber stamp approach to how do we use and apply AI. It's very contextual, very scenario based, lots of different variables that you have to kind of address. And so this team worked across all the products at Meta and would think about the use of AI in those products and whether or not it was being built in a way that was protecting people and society, whether it was ethical, private, and so on. Did we give users agency over their data, things like that? So very much a horizontal team across all of the products, but also had influence over the engineering and data science groups as well. So how they actually build and maintain and manage the whole life cycle of AI. What kinds of tools they use, what kinds of processes they leverage in terms of gathering data, cleaning and building training data, and so on. So lots of process and methodology type thinking as well. So it's very little, honestly, to do with UX UI in the sense of we're designing wireframes and mobile screens. It's more thinking about the intelligent system that's inside that app that's driving those decisions, those outcomes from the system. The reason why a lot of companies, IBM, Google, Apple, centralize these teams is because of the complexity of the work. It's still evolving. People are still learning about how to manage and maintain these systems. And so you want to kind of bring that team together so that they can work as a tight group on figuring out the best ways to handle this. It's also an evolving regulatory space. And so having a centralized group being able to understand what regulation means and compliance means, and then being able to disseminate that out from a single source. So there's ownership and accountability to that team. That kind of helps. The goal is honestly to kind of make everybody aware of responsible AI. So it's just like designing for mobile. Like people understand how to design mobile. They didn't, 15 years ago. It's a journey, and hopefully the goal is for everybody to get to a place where they can kind of understand this themselves. The team itself is cross-functional. We also we identify and determine the problems to solve. What is the most critical thing that we can fix? What are foundational issues that apply to all products and users? So we're trying to prioritize constantly, like what is going to give us the most impact, how to measure that. There's a lot of applied research that's still going on in terms of like metrics and figuring out like how do you even quantify some of these things. The team itself has policy experts, ethical experts, integrity experts, lots of different kinds of roles involved that aren't typical in normal products. And so the space is still evolving there. You might even have people from philosophy involved because as the systems learn and evolve, they change. And so you're trying to project where could this thing go in the future and what could potential harms be in the future. How do we mitigate that now? What kind of methods can we start to invent and prototype now? Our AI is also a gatekeeper sometimes. When should we use AI? Is AI the right tool for the job? Can some other technical solution suffice? Why do we need a learning algorithm here or not? We also look at different stages of the production life cycle and figure out, what could we improve in data labeling and gathering processes? What could we learn in terms of content design, in terms of making transparent to users how things work, and making it easy for them to understand. The goal too of our AI is to get out of the way of the rest of the company. We're not there to be a blocker. We're there to help make sure that there's nothing untoward happening. But we also are trying to empower teams to make decisions in real time. And so we often build frameworks and decision-making methods that help teams move at the pace of their own businesses. And so it's more of how to teach a person to fish rather than, getting in the way and micromanaging them. Part of that too is to kind of assess, is the framework holding up? Is it working across different scenarios? Is it giving, guidance that makes sense and is actionable?
Yeah. And like when you started to talk about, frameworks and processes and tooling, obviously a lot of the designers out there that are probably listening to this have never had to build a tool for, AI before, and never even had to think about ethics. I mean, we're so used to thinking about empathy and the user, which is already kind of a new, framing for a lot of companies, especially, and sometimes individuals. But what are some of the tools that you guys use and that you try to put in the hands of the teams that are building these, various AI tools, so that they can more easily think about responsible AI and ethics when they build their, their next product?
It's a great question. So again, it's like our goal is to kind of empower and advise and educate teams on the latest thinking around these issues. And so there's like 3 or 4 things that we use in terms of high level approaches. The first is, defining your principles and values. It sounds like a standard kind of design approach, but in this, it's a little different because it's a machine that emulates thinking and thinking like processes. And so, how should that thing think? How should it make trade-offs and prioritize things? When you think about things like transparency and privacy, for example, you want to make sure that a user is adequately informed, right? We give them information that has a material nature to it that they can make informed decisions about how much data they share. If we give too much transparency, that could inundate the user, but it could also leave the system open to adversarial attacks, right? If we give too much of the, how the cookie is, how the sausage is made away, that leaves us open to security and privacy concerns. And so you're always kind of balancing some kind of trade-off between, sharing too much information as it comes to transparency and security. So how do you balance those things? And so that's not a one-size-fits-all. It depends on the scenario, depends on the type of data that you're using, how critical that data is or not. So that's a different approach than, say, versus building a style guide where it's like, thou shalt always do X, Y, and Z. That doesn't really work. And so if you don't have an ethical team, a policy team, and so on, smaller companies don't often have that. They're looking for outside resources and vendors and, reading books and so on. The best thing to do is actually sit down as a team and write what you think your principles and values are. Bring in your audiences and have them help co-create those principles and values. Try and frame up those principles and values through both good scenarios and potentially negative scenarios and see how they hold up. That, sort of bulletproof those things. That's a good place to get to where there's at least some kind of coherence and consistency, and engineering understands that, design and UX understand that, the business leaders understand that. So at least there's some coherence across the group. That's a good first step. Another methodology is red and blue teaming. So we're stealing from engineering playbooks here, where they hire an outside vendor, ethical hackers, if you will, to test their security systems to see if there are flaws, so that they can then patch those systems. That's the old school way of doing this. Well, whether you're brainstorming a 0 to 1 product or a feature, it's great to everybody focuses typically on the benefits and the upside and the blue sky, and everybody holds hands and is excited about the potential of this new fantastic product that you're going to bring. I recommend taking it to the room next door the day later and having a different team think about how that product might go wrong, or might get subverted in some way, or how the model might change its behavior over time because it drifts from its intended use. It starts to learn new things that it wasn't necessarily built for, or somebody in the company reuses that same model for a different task, and that might have unintended consequences. And so playing the negative role helps people understand how this could be impactful in a not so great way, and then build mitigations around that, or at least maybe think about reprioritizing the roadmap to work on the things that feel more safe, in quotes, and leaving those more risky things off until you've done some more due diligence around what those features and capabilities might deliver. With sprint planning, it's good to have experts in the room. So if you don't have them on hand, they're not on staff, bring in outside experts like policy experts, civil and human rights experts if you're in the sort of social space, and have them be part of the team as you kick off a sprint. I think it's actually really powerful to anchor everyone in that room on some scenarios and some best practices and some examples of negative outcomes, some watch out, things like that before the sprint kicks off. So they can be short, simple 10-minute, 15-minute presentations where it's like, here's 3 things that you should learn about the EU AI Act. Here's some things about the Digital Services Act, and so on. Here, thinking about the broader community that you might be designing for. It might not just be US centric, it might be EU, it might be Asia, it might be different parts of the world. Thinking about those regulations and just hitting the high level stuff so that everybody's grounded in a sense of the gravitas of how much these things can make a difference in society. That helps as well. And then lastly, leveraging things like service design for continuous improvement. So you can do that on the end product itself, but I highly recommend using service design on the actual production lifecycle itself. So how engineers build, what tools they use, what code they use, what data is gathered, and those methods around gathering it, and so on. Each touch point in that factory, if you will, of building a model requires different skill sets, different functions to kind of work together. But oftentimes those functions actually don't understand the ethical implications of what they're doing, or the compliance, legal implications of what they're doing, and so on. So going down that stack of humans who are touching the code and the data and so on as it moves along the chain, and giving them a cheat sheet of here's the things to be wary of, don't do these things. But again, you're not trying to slow down innovation, you're not trying to slow down their delivery times. You want to try and integrate that into their workflow as seamlessly as you can, so that over time the products that are coming out the other end are more thoughtfully engineered.
Wow, that's it's amazing that you've kind of thought through so many parts of this process. I mean, from the earliest stages of like just tooling and processes to kind of like help guide teams to like the types of roles that might be necessary. One of the things, that we really focus on in this podcast is helping design leaders and their team growth. right? And as they go through that journey of scaling their operation, there are lots of things that undoubtedly will change, and they'll have to adapt. And well, let's be honest, AI is pretty much the biggest game changer since maybe the discovery of fire that we've seen in a very, very long time. What do you think design team leads are going to need to plan for in the future? Like, what type of skills will they be looking for? What type of tooling should they be thinking about? We've talked a little bit already about process, so we won't get into that. But what other things, I don't know, that we're not thinking of already, do we need to be thinking about as the landscape of the designer really changes?
Yeah, it's a fascinating space. It's kind of like when mobile started to take off, and we all started to learn about responsive grids and reflowing content and content design and all those kinds of new roles that start to develop. I think this is way bigger than that. And nobody is doing this well, just so you know. There's no company out there that has nailed this and has like the perfect process in place. And so what is interesting with that is there's both an output in terms of like what the new products look like, but then there's also, who is making it, how are they making it, what does that mean? And I think both of those are very fluid and ambiguous right now, which is great for designers because we can come in and kind of start to identify those things that are patterns and methods and things that we can operationalize in a way that only designers can do, because we have empathy for people and we can pull teams together in new ways. So I think it's a really environmentally rich space for designers and design thinking who are used to dealing with challenging problems. I think NLP is, natural language processing is obviously going to be a huge thing. That's going to revolutionize, design and product design. I think natural language will be in every product within a year. It'll just happen. Meta, for example, just released a new model that can speak 1,000 languages. So just think about that from an adoption perspective. It's unbelievable. We can basically build an app now that works for anybody anywhere in the world, which is incredible.
And to just jump in there for those maybe unfamiliar and I want to make sure I get it right too. When you're talking about NLP or natural language processing, you're kind of talking about some of the familiar apps that I think people have started to see, or like ChatGPT utilizes that from an interface perspective and the way that it interacts with the user. And then versus like the idea of generative AI. Can you actually help define generative AI and natural language processing so that people are understanding of the two terms, and then like examples of each?
Then, natural language processing is simply put, me understanding what your intention is when you say something to me. And then you can connect natural language processing to what we call robotic process automation, which is basically a kind of, if you think of it, natural language is the brain, robotic processing is the spine and the arms and the appendages, right? So that it can actually do something with that information. So it is a new kind of interface. It replaces buttons and drop downs and scroll bars and all those things, because it understands your intention and then can connect the dots to a task, an action, and so on. Generative AI is a little different, where it is basically remashing something that it's heard from you and generating something net new from that. So those two things can blur. It's hard to, it's a sort of scenario-based thing. But it basically is used in a more creative process. So you ask ChatGPT to do your kids' homework, it can write a paper for you. That's generating that content. But ChatGPT can also be used as a method to understand what I'm saying and connect back to another system. So In an application, for example, um, the natural language processing agent will understand better the context of my scenario right now. Am I in the car? Yes. Okay, don't show me pictures because I can't take my eye off the road, right? So it will use language to describe something rather than show me an image. Whereas, so that contextual awareness will be something that we'll start to see in applications and mobile apps. And so I think over time, natural language could disambiguate old school model, UI. What I mean by that is it will gradually take away more of the buttons that you see on the screen because its understanding will grow. And so it won't need to have these kind of crude, do you mean this or do you mean this? And you push the button on the screen and say, I'm in this. It'll actually just understand it. So it won't need those other things that you normally see on, say, the typical assistants.
Yeah, I think that's one of the biggest like changes for me is like having a lot more freedom to ask the system that I'm working with to do something unique. And so like before, if I wanted to like work, I don't know, find somebody on LinkedIn, for example, I'd have to like go into the system, I would type their name, I'd then have to select a number of different filters, and it would be a very linear path, and it would give me a very specific, list. But if I wanted to get more creative with that and like ask it to do something special, like, give me a list of like 1,000 people that are first and secondary connections that are like, the top influencers based on impressions, and organize them into a table and like make sure that I have all their email addresses. That would be like typically a harder like task for it to do, but I could just like write all that out and like in seconds, it would do it. And so like the idea of like the traditional interface, I think, is almost like completely being blown up because of natural language processing and its ability to understand and make sense of what you're saying. And then with the generative portion, the GPT side, able to be creative with that and maybe even expand upon it if necessary.
The interesting thing that is underlying what you're saying is virtual agents will eventually get smart enough where you don't need to go anywhere else. You won't need to search the web. You won't need to search LinkedIn. You'll just be able to say, hey, I'm looking for 10 experts that need to help me in vision AI. And, it'd be great if they were, warm connections that I have some, friends that could introduce me or something like that. And it's your prompt from the one that you just described gets to this big because it just understands where you're going. It's inferring. And so if it's doing that in this scenario, why would I ever need to go to a website? So the issue there for Google is that's going to kill their advertising business, right? Google search is designed to be doorways into the best content on those websites, and that's how they make money. Now, this is kind of what Bill Gates was saying the other day, where it's like, we're going after Google and we're going after Amazon. Why would I need either of those businesses when my assistant on my device disambiguates all of that other infrastructure behind them? So really, this is a battle between the two business models, an ad revenue model or a subscription model. And that's what's going to get really interesting here. So not only is it going to change what designers are designing on screen, it's going to change all of the stuff behind it that we were thinking about in terms of the supply chain.
And like, I'm trying to think about this myself, but we're just continuing down that natural language processing and changing of like how interfaces are built. Like, what are the skills that the UX designers of the future are going to need? You and I have talked offline a little bit about how a lot of the visual design work could eventually kind of get offloaded in some way. But as I start to think about it, this is a complete paradigm shift Right. And so, yeah, maybe some visual design work could get offloaded to an AI. But given that this is net new territory, the AI may not even understand like how to build an interface like this because it's never learned from us humans, which helped feed it all this great information. So, like, when we start to think a little bit ahead to those UX designers of the future, like, what are the skills they've got? You know, is it interface design? Is it something else?
It's I think it'll be something else. So I think design systems, patterns, components, all those things will just be owned by the AI. The reason is those things are all patterns. AI is amazing at pattern recognition. It's amazing at optimizing things, and so it will be able to do that at scale that no human team could ever be able to manage. I've sat in numerous critiques over the last 20 years where the conversation is, how do we make sure that this thing looks like this thing, looks like this thing, right? A machine will just do that. It will, and not only that, your assumption of what the best of those things is most likely off anyway. And so, metrics, analytics, AI will just, kill it on that. So I think visual design in the sort of typical sense of what a lot of large companies have is a massive group of designers who manage a massive design system, and they all understand pieces of it. The AI will just orchestrate that whole thing. The AI at the moment isn't good at being net new inventive. So I think there'll still be, we've discovered some new paradigm. But I think where UX UI goes to is contextual awareness of a system. So, like I mentioned, if I'm in the car, it goes into this modality. It talks about things in this way. It prompts me in these kinds of conversations. So it's more of a conversational design approach. Whereas if I'm sitting on the couch and I've got my iPad in front of me, I was designing systems 6 or 7 years ago where we would, instead of describing things, we would show you images and say, which of these 6 things is the thing that you really mean? And so, again, that's where generative AI might come in. It might show me, here's 3 versions of your couch that you could possibly buy for your living room in situ. And now I'm like, oh, I want that one. Describing that in a voice way would just be onerous, right? It would just take too long. Whereas an image suddenly just cuts through and just gives me that clarity. So I think designers will be designing context and thinking through what is the appropriate thing at the right time. And the AI will then execute against that. So that's kind of where it will move. And then I think obviously the AI bias, AI responsibility piece will be huge as well, designing for much more niche communities, and having that empathy to kind of really drill down into, what is appropriate for different communities, what kinds of language, what kinds of imagery. It's very dicey because you could say that that's inequality because you're teaching and designing for different communities in different ways. That can go in a bad way, which we could do a whole other podcast on. But thinking through inequality and equities, balancing those, I think will be the prime kind of space for AI designers. And the design itself will change. We can sort of talk about the different skills. Designers will become more hybrid in nature. They might have one foot in policy and one in design. And what that designer does is workshop with regulators and civil and human rights experts to figure out like those guidelines that AI thinking machines should adhere to in different scenarios, and thinking through how to plan and red team and come up with different ways that we might miss some things. That person knowing policy and knowing human empathy skills coming together and being the glue between 2 different kinds of factions who work on this will be helpful. I think the same will be true of voice designers and service designers, that they'll have a foot in a different group, and will become the glue to bring this larger group of stakeholders together to design these systems. Cool.
So Chris, you talked a little bit about a voice designer. What exactly does a voice designer do?
Yeah, really, it's a conversational designer. And when you think about how we talk to each other, how we text each other, how we email each other, those are all different ways of communicating, right? We both use English, but what I might text to you might be very brief. I have a 14-year-old son. He might just respond with the letter K, right? That's what I get all the time from him. Whereas my 70-year-old mum in a text message might write something as if it's a letter, where it's like several paragraphs. Dear Chris at the top, love mum at the bottom, in a text message. And so understanding the sort of norms and etiquette of different communication channels is what a conversational designer does. And so you want to train an AI to be able to manage different channels like that, so that it's not delivering War and Peace through a text message, and then in an email something as brief as a tweet. And so it has that contextual awareness to be able to communicate in a way that feels authentic.
Wow. So, I mean, it sounds like, I think a lot of writers were a little bit worried about, being completely out of a job. It does sound like, people who are strong writers, this be actually a very good job for them.
Yeah, no, I think it is still something that's interesting. I think ChatGPT has really shown how these large language models can kind of bite into that role. It's pretty interesting if you ask ChatGPT to distill large text down into a summary. It does a really good job. If you get good at, in quotes, at prompt engineering, you could have it generate stuff for social media, stuff for short form and long form and so on. So it can do that work, which is powerful stuff. But in terms of real-time conversation, I think most companies will want to hire people to kind of design and really articulate those conversations well, especially in regulated industries like banking and healthcare and so on, where legalese is really important around the actual language that's being used. And so making sure that the AI is on track that way.
Yeah, I think still a lot of work needs to be done there. I mean, even in my usage of ChatGPT, there can oftentimes be mistakes and, or misinterpreting what I said, and I kind of got to dumb it down for the system a little bit. It makes a whole lot of sense. One of the things that I wanted to talk about, and I know that this has become a really important topic, especially in the ethics part of the conversation. We've seen Adobe Firefly now come out. They've taken a very specific stance in regards to training their models on, either owned work, like work that they have ownership over, or that they have the rights to utilize for the purpose of training a model. And that's kind of been a stake in the ground in some ways, where other groups, I won't name any specifics, and I actually don't know if the other groups do or do not do this, so I don't want to say they do or don't. But I know that Adobe is putting a stake in the ground about this. And people have been very vocal, especially in the design community, saying, like, you're stealing other people's work. I think there is somewhat of an ethical discussion to be had also about, hey, if I go to a museum and I'm inspired by Da Vinci and, Picasso and all the great artists, and then I go and create my own, version of their, kind of an amalgamation of their work, am I violating some sort of ethical code? I feel like, artists have stolen from each other for years, it's always been that way. So where is the line start to be drawn? I'm curious to hear your point of view on all that, and where things are going for the industry.
Yeah, it's a fascinating conversation. And again, this could be easily another podcast. I think the difference, though, with artists copying artists is artists had to learn how to be artists in the first place. There's still some manual work there where, as a kid, I learned how to appreciate, Michelangelo and Leonardo and, do figure study and kind of compare my charcoal sketches to theirs and refine my own style over years. That's not the same with AI today, where you can literally just type in a few sentences and boom, you've got, something that looks like it comes from the 14th century immediately. And, that kind of cuts out the middleman. So I definitely think the copyright lawyers have their work cut out for them. I think it extends beyond just what we're talking about here, though. If I can model thinking processes, can I model people out of the workforce? Right? That's a bigger question, right? If I can do it with art, can I do it with, accounting or, pick any kind of vocation? And basically, these things are massive automation systems. And, if you think that way, that's another part of responsible AI, which is just because we can, should we do that? And, is society ready for mass layoffs because these systems will become so good at what they're doing that it impacts, the ability for the economy to function anymore because not enough people are able to sustain a job? I think the flip side too is that people might actually start to treat people like AI. You'll expect people to just deliver amazing work as quickly as an AI does, and that will have impacts as well on our social and professional relationships with people. And we haven't studied those tensions yet and how that might impact our collective psychology.
Yeah, I mean, it certainly could be a whole, it could be much more than a podcast. I think we could write a book about this particular subject because it is so complex. And I think we've all started to be, having those conversations with friends or colleagues, about the positive and negative effects of AI, not just on our industry, but every industry and, well, frankly, humanity. And these are definitely important conversations to be had. And I don't want to dive too deep into it because I think we will easily get off topic. But I do think it is a really important thing for us to think about, especially in terms of I think the approach Adobe is taking, I personally have enjoyed. I think that's the right approach. Trying to get a consent, trying to think about this in an ethical and responsible manner. I think they saw where it was going wrong. We talked about the red team and blue team before, and they saw that there was a lot of backlash in the community, and they responded by coming up with a very, I think, responsible solution. And I think those are the type of things that design leaders and teams need to be thinking about when they start to develop this tooling for the future, whether they are creating it or utilizing it. And I think it's just it's going to be very interesting to see where things go from here. But I think that's a good place to kind of wrap our conversation. But before we go, I just wanted to give you any parting words with the with our audience about the state of AI and where things are going for designers.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are some things that designers can feel pretty safe about. I know there's a lot of anxiety in the industry right now. I think design thinking and empathizing with users is going to still be squarely in the designer's role and the UX role. I think being imaginative and creative and thinking through new ways of dealing with user challenges is going to be something that we still own for quite some time. It's going to be very long before an AI can really understand the world and really understand people's emotions and intentionality and things like that. So I think we're safe in that space. I do think I would recommend to designers to, learn simple 101 AI terminology, learn what it means to build a model and train a model and all the processes that go into that, the different kinds of models, learn a smattering of regulation, right? Try and keep up on what's happening in the EU. Those things really help. Learn about ethical processes and methodologies. Peter Singer is a great ethicist to kind of learn from. Practical ethics, things like that are really helpful. So you can start to understand how a thinking machine might have an impact on the world. In terms of evaluating talent, I think the world is going to become a lot more ambiguous and fluid. So I think people who are adaptable and resilient and open-minded, thinking through like how to learn new stuff and just diving in and rolling up their sleeves. There are really, I know I'll get some backlash for this, but there are really no experts because AI isn't a static space. It's constant. I mean, every week, every day almost, there's a new white paper that's coming out. And frankly, not all the, in quotes, experts understand not just the technology, but how, humans are amazing at taking tools and using them in ways the people who invented the tools didn't think about, right? And that's the piece that these, research scientists don't understand, is that we're very crafty in how we use tools. And that's the bit that they hadn't planned for. They were thinking in a lab, they were thinking it could be used for X number of use cases, and now it's exploded into numerous different spaces. And so saying you're an expert is a little bit of a fallacy. It's such an amorphous, constantly changing space. So, just diving in, trying to learn this stuff, figuring out MVPs, prototyping, experiences, failing fast again is like a good way to kind of get into this space. And there are no stupid questions.
Yeah, it's very humbling to hear that. There are no experts in AI at the moment, and that also presents a great opportunity, I think, for a lot of the folks out there. And the recommended reading that you mentioned, that would be great for us to include in the show notes. So if you wouldn't mind sending me a few links, I will make sure that those get added. I personally would love to read them as well as I start to digest and learn the space even more. But Chris, this was been fantastic. It was so great to speak to you about this topic, and I know our audience is just going to absolutely love it. Just one last parting thing is there anywhere people can follow along with you? Any of your thoughts, maybe content that you're producing?
Sure. Yeah, I can send you the links to that as well. I have a Medium account. I also have a website where I have some of my work. So I'm going to be doing a lot more writing on this subject. I've been getting a lot of interest from various places, and I want to put more time to put pen to paper to kind of expand on this.
Oh, that's fantastic. Well, thank you again so much for taking the time with us today, and we'll see you soon. Thanks again.
Thanks, Adam. This has been a pleasure.
Cheers.